Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everybody back to an invigorating day focusing on resources and reorienting those resources. So my name is Cathy Baase. I am a member of the Population Health Roundtable and also the board chair for the Michigan Health Improvement Alliance. It's my pleasure to get this session kicked off by introducing an individual who's going to share a leadership story with us. This morning, we began by talking about the importance of resources, but also the importance of leadership, really bringing us forward to the next stage of insight and evolution, and how those leadership stories inform us and help us learn on this journey. So it's my pleasure to introduce Jamie Rantanen, who is the Senior Vice President and Institutional Client Advisor with U.S. Trust at Bank of America. His bio is available in the materials for today's session, so we're going to go ahead and get right to that session. So based on a great morning of discussion, we have an audience primed for further dialogue, and we will have time and opportunity for people to ask questions, but we're going to get started with really you starting at a high level, and we'll take a number of different areas of focus, and then we'll sort of narrow down to some case studies and get into some open question and answer time. So good. Just to get us started, can you talk about how Bank of America and U.S. Trust really have an impact vision and how that ever got started?
Absolutely. My pleasure to be here today, and thank you for allowing me to represent Bank of America and kind of the role it's playing in the healthcare finance spectrum. Also my firm, U.S. Trust, which is the private wealth management arm of Bank of America. I would say a great way to start that answer is that 10 years ago in 2008, Bank of America wrote their first ESG, Environmental, Social, and Governance manual, in which they would continue to evolve this document to over 100 pages today and update it annually. And it really is the driving force for the organization when we talk about how we grow with responsible growth. And for those of you, I'm sure many of you, if not all, are familiar with ESG, standing for Environmental, Social, and Governance. And the lessons that we learned as one of the leading and largest financial institutions in the 2008 crisis was that we were not adequately prepared to understand and anticipate the environmental, social, and governance risks that existed, and that we needed to take accounting of those things and make sure that that's part of how we grow going forward. Healthcare investment and banking is a key part of our business. We are, Bank of America is one of the largest financial providers to the healthcare industry. We have over $35 billion of capital out to the healthcare industry in the United States across many, many types of healthcare institutions, from large for-profit hospitals to nonprofit community healthcare organizations to private physicians' offices, et cetera. So we've been able to extend a meaningful amount of capital to the market in the healthcare space, something I'm incredibly proud of.
So a couple questions just on that. You mentioned ESG, and can you speak to how much health is really represented in ESG? And you mentioned healthcare, but we're really thinking of health as a very broad construct of upstream and downstream approaches. Do you want to just sort of put health in the context of that ESG?
Yes, ESG, health is centered, I think, really, you can make a case that health is centered in each of those categories: environmental, social, and governance. Governance might be the types of policies that corporations enable and to maintain and make sure that they're governing their organizations for adequate health care for their employees. So you think of it in that context. If you think of environmental, you think of the access to healthy food, clean water, clean living conditions, and then obviously social, the access to health care. So all of these things are directly grounded into ESG. I'm just going to flip the page and give a few examples of how we consider healthcare in ESG, and I don't want to miss any. Some of the key factors that when we consider healthcare investing, especially in the public markets, we're thinking about companies that have an emphasis or a practice in the following: things like healthy food, agricultural technology, fitness, medical research and diagnostics, disease prevention and disease treatment, access to health care, air quality, water quality, product safety, employee benefits, as I just mentioned. And we also choose to exclude those companies that are actually negatively impacting environmental, social related healthcare issues like unhealthy food, alcohol, tobacco, gambling, adult entertainment, toxic polluters, those that lack the standard employee benefits, living wage, et cetera, that we believe ought to be delivered to employees. So long answer, I think, with some context of how we take health into account into the public markets when we invest.
Do businesses know when they're being included or excluded from these kinds of decision-making?
In what way?
Well, you said you know when you're doing this investing, you'll look for companies that behave a certain way and exclude those who behave a different way. I just wondered, do they actually know that? Is there a feedback loop that would tell them that they're featuring those things which are being viewed positively, or that in fact that they've got some issues that's causing them to be excluded from this type of investment consideration?
So I think we've heard today the context of impact investing and mission-aligned investing as a growing force in the market, with the kind of advent over the past decade of environmental and social and governance data becoming readily available for investors to consider alongside of financial data. And so I think to address your question in the beginning, I think we're lacking necessarily the realization by investors that they can be intentional, whether they're an individual or an institution, about what they're investing in. And I think we're in a period of this decade where I believe we're going to have a bigger conversion of intentional investors to start to want to focus on these kinds of issues. Many of the large companies that we invest in take all of these things very much to account, really both as on three levels, both at a fiduciary level to make sure that they're doing no harm, and that they are not exposing themselves to a level of risk in the marketplace. Secondly, to establish themselves as a mission brand, perhaps. If they're a company that is leading in, let's say, sustainable, whatever it may be, food, it's pointing towards a more sustainable, more healthy outcome, and that is the reason that company perhaps exists. And then third, I think we're also talking about how the world is changing from a climate perspective, and if you think about food in particular, how we need to address the lack of adequate food resources to serve the population, as we've all heard. We need 2 or 3 Earths to support the human population by the year 2050 from a food perspective. So the adaptation to producing sustainable food that is environmentally friendly and healthy is also good business. And we understand that there is a big transition now to, for example, sustainable agriculture. There's a lot of great investable areas that even if you just want a financial investment and you're trying not to do well, or do good, I'm sorry, but you're trying to do well financially, that we're really seeing great opportunities because of the way the world is progressing with climate. and lack of resources, that these become really, really compelling investable strategies.
Yeah, great. So interesting space that we're in, and you talked about this decade being sort of a decade of evolution, and I think the arc has been even longer than maybe a decade where these kind of things are coming to the forefront. Can you just tell us a little bit about how you came to be in this position and your background? How did you get into this work?
Sure. I've been advising clients in the investment space for about 25 years, both on the individual and on the institutional side. Most recently, I was the head of a leading global asset management impact investing and ESG platform for the U.S. prior to joining U.S. Trust about 1.5 years ago, and had a pretty interesting experience in mostly on the working around the concept of private health care, and particularly in emerging markets. So something pretty far away and foreign from what we do here in the U.S. In my new role at U.S. Trust, I'm primarily focused on public market investing and how that correlates to healthcare. But actually, I'll kind of conclude this conversation with a case study of how we as an organization are really morphing both what we see from the public market investment opportunity into a combined force with private market and even place-based investing.
So could you talk to us a little bit more about how you would distinguish sort of the Bank of America and U.S. Trust? Is one a subsidiary of the other, or do they have, what do they share and what are they different? And so maybe starting with Bank of America and giving us a bit about U.S. Trust?
Sure. Bank of America is the parent organization for U.S. Trust, which is the wealth management arm of Bank of America. U.S. Trust serves ultra-high net worth individuals, families, family offices, and we have a particular focus on institutional nonprofits. We have a dedicated team of over 200 who are committed to serve institutional nonprofits, including a specialist healthcare advisor team on the institutional nonprofit side. We have specialists around the country who specifically work with healthcare organizations across the organization, both on investment-related activity and organizational development-related activities, whether it's impact measurement or board development or donor development, et cetera. We work really on both sides of healthcare institutions to not only align their mission and their investment portfolio to their mission of typically community health, but also we work with the organizations themselves to help them become more sustainable, vibrant, and successful from an organizational standpoint. So again, we have the benefit of sitting under Bank of America with roughly $35 billion of assets of capital that's been deployed to the healthcare sector. We've got the full ability to connect kind of the large scale of healthcare banking to our clients at U.S. Trust, who tend to be more of the endowments, foundations, institutional providers of healthcare. So it's a great resource to have kind of a boutique inside such a large bank with such a big presence on the healthcare investment side.
So on the U.S. Trust, I'm not quite sure how long that's been in place as part of Bank of America. Could you give us a little bit of sense of the trajectory there? Do you see there becoming a lot more interest, more clients, and how their interests might be changing, or sort of the amount of assets that are coming into that space? Can you speak to that?
Sure. U.S. Trust is actually is the oldest private bank and largest private bank in the U.S., founded in 1865. It was acquired by Bank of America, I should know, I don't, precisely, but more than a dozen years ago. And we are, again, serving the ultra-high net worth investors of Bank of America. So we have this tremendous experience of working with the wealthiest families. Our oldest private bank customers at U.S. Trust are 8 generations old. I think there's a really tremendous advantage that we have in working with families generation over generation. And as was, I'm sure, recognized and is recognized now in the room, the impact investing movement is incredibly important to the younger generations, particularly the millennials. Those in my generation, around my generation, are becoming incredibly interested in impact investing. And even some of the older generations are understanding that even if it's not their direct orientation or what they would choose to do, they know that their family members, the ones who are going to inherit their money and their legacy, really are seeking, a huge focus on environmental and social and governance issues. So I think having the perspective of working with families on a multi-generational basis and being able to, I think, carefully insert impact investing into the process of these families, generation over generation, is a really great and important challenge that we've got now. Other firms like U.S. Trust have a really great opportunity to kind of shepherd this capital, significant capital, into very high impact and I think well-run fiduciary portfolios for the future that are both doing well and good. So some of these families that we work with are the leading families of wealth in the world, and they really care about what they're investing in. They're doing a lot of direct investments into very high impact companies that will become their future companies for their families. So it's a really, really important conversation, and one that really has to work its way through a family tree, I would say.
So just focusing for a moment on the socially innovative investment platform, can you speak a little bit more about the platform itself in terms of its breadth and depth, how you put that information together and present it to these clients that you're working with? How do they begin to see their array of options and make those kinds of selections? But how does this platform work?
So U.S. Trust has, for impact investing in the public markets, we have a platform called Socially Innovative Investing we refer to as S2I. The platform was born about 6 years ago, so we have in five different portfolios, we've got 5-year track records. The platform was born to really create an ESG overlay across the thematics represented by the Sustainable Development Goals and express those overlays and those thematics into public market equities and bond portfolios. We have developed low carbon portfolios, religious views and values portfolios, global equality portfolios, women and girls portfolios. We've developed a community health portfolio. We are in process of developing a few other portfolios that are directly correlating to the Sustainable Development Goals. What we have seen is, and really the ESG decade is here, and we're seeing that, frankly, that we're getting very, very good performance in these portfolios 5 years later, and in most cases outperformance over benchmark, because we're considering factors that the average investor is not considering. So we start this from a financial perspective and say, how can we align to a thematic, but also go deeper with information that the majority of investors are not considering when they're making decisions. And that's the ESG decade that we're in today, where managers have a chance to, and are, in some cases, outperforming their benchmarks. Just on that point, there's a statistic that another organization, Merrill Lynch, under the Bank of America umbrella, it's Bank of America, U.S. Trust, and Merrill Lynch are all under the mother of Bank of America. Merrill Lynch has put out a recent quantitative equity strategy report on ESG that said that if you looked at the S&P 500 and that you broke out the value of the S&P 500, 68% of that is based on intangible assets. And really that the best way to understand the values and the risk of those assets is to use environmental, social, and governance data. So what I'm painting the picture here for is that really the financial investment world is waking up, I think, rapidly now to using very high quality ESG data to extrapolate better information on how to invest. As the CEO of the world's largest asset manager said in the first quarter of this year, ESG investing is just better investing. So we have the financial side pushing very hard to drive the point that when you have more information to invest across what a company's doing, chances are you can understand the risk and the return better. We've also got the interesting correlation. For example, if you look at fossil fuel, and if you took any of the three leading indices that produce fossil fuel measurement in the marketplace today, and I won't name them, but they're well-known names in the ESG space. If you invested just in those fossil fuel-free indices over the past 5 years, you would have averaged something about 3% better than the market, than the S&P 500 each year in any of those indices. So you've also got an opportunity here using ESG screened investing, and the reason why we built this platform is there are thematics that are driving out performance in the market, and some of them are environmental, some of them are social, some of them deal with, especially on the risk side, deal with governance. So, and then there's really, once you've established the financial argument and the argument that there's opportunity in the marketplace that can be derived through ESG analytics, then you can go to mission alignment and say, you as an endowment or a foundation or an individual, what are you waiting for? Now it's time to understand what you're investing in more completely, to be intentional with your money, to align to your mission, because now I think it's becoming more and more clear to the market that the performance, the financial performance and the risk-adjusted returns are there, and that the ability to isolate to thematics around health in particular are there, and companies are reporting on that whole series and list of topics that I read off earlier regularly now, and the depth and the quality of this company reporting at a large public company level is getting better and better and better. So we now have the opportunity versus 5 years ago to make very strong financial decisions and investments and align at a fiduciary level in the portfolios that ultimately give you the opportunity for mission alignment without the cost or the risk that you would be seen to be in breach of a fiduciary kind of process.
Great. Lots of good information. Could you maybe share a case study or a case story or sort of an example to bring this down to a practical, granular level, and sort of how does this work in the real world story?
Sure. I have a great one, and I have a colleague in the room, Lisa Richter from Avivar, and I'm going to share a little bit of a story around how U.S. Trust and Avivar are working together with a regional community foundation where community health is among the key pillars of what we're trying to accomplish in the portfolio. In brief, a community health foundation went out to an RFP at the beginning of this year and said, we'd like to do two things. We'd like to build out a platform for local place-based community impact investments, which, as many of you may know, will tend to be smaller, will tend to be off of a larger bank or asset management type of platform, and some cases will then need to be curated or created to be invested in. So the kind of local place-based community health investment opportunity is not easily identified and not easily accessed. So half of this foundation's challenge was how do we solve for that, and then how do we broadly mission align our portfolio in kind of traditional asset classes, public markets, that can also give us the exposures we're looking for community impact, in particular health. And what they found was there wasn't really a platform that existed that could bring both the sort of national, international, big picture, public market perspective on health and environment and other kind of community impact pillars to a portfolio, in addition to what they were seeking with very regional place-based impact investments along the same thematics. So we were able to create a combined force with two organizations combining kind of a national, international, asset allocated, sort of broad portfolio fiduciary perspective on how we would invest across asset allocations, asset classes, but with a very community impact lens, driven through the portfolio, and then working in conjunction with a private place-based investment advisor, Avivar, who will take assets out of our asset allocation model and place those into the market that are going to be in place and local, and will typically be more illiquid. And what was created in the end, and we won the mandate based on the fact that we were delivering both, the local and the everything else, the national and the kind of beyond. And we were delivering access to all asset classes, whether they were a named asset class or not, or whether they were a form of blended finance, which I'm sure we've talked about. So I think there's a lot of lessons learned here early on in this process, but I think one thing is that, and I've seen in my travels, is that community organizations are really, really focused on what can they do at home, what can they do in their community to improve the long tail of health and health improvement by making kind of community level investments, and then how can that be supported with the bigger picture of what are the big companies we're investing in doing to support these initiatives, and are they aligned, and are we investing in things that are actually causing more harm than good? It's pretty interesting if you look at the largest employers by state. It's either Walmart or healthcare institutions are typically the largest employers by state across the country. So if you think about Walmart is a company we can invest in as a public company, and most people have it in their portfolio. It's really important what that company is doing to affect, and the very significant effect it can have on employee health as part of what they're doing as an organization. Fortunately, they've been on, I don't want to open a can of worms, but I think they've been on the improving and better side than not, from my perspective. So I guess, bringing this full circle, community organizations would love to do things that matter in their place, but they also understand they have the opportunity to do things that are more national and involve the companies that live in their organizations, employ people in their organizations, maybe are the biggest employers in their communities. So getting both sides is really become a bigger and bigger focus of these types of organizations.
Great. So I'm going to invite you to come to the microphone with your questions now. But while you're getting organized for that, I wanted to just ask one more question, Jamie. What do you think about how typical or atypical is it, what you're doing in U.S. Trust? I mean, you have a number of peers out there in the industry, and you're seeing that you're sort of operating in the same space, or are you emblematic of sort of just a unique niche play here?
I've personally been on the impact investing frontier for 10 years, and I would say, fortunately, it's gotten a bit more crowded in a good way now that there are multiple really, I would say, large firms that have built, I think, strong platforms that continue to support the scale of dollars going into impact. That said, there are many, many smaller organizations across the whole impact continuum that have emerged strongly with track records that still remain small but are vital. The ecosystem is young, impact investing ecosystem is really young. I would say it has so much potential, especially around the intersection between philanthropy and impact investing and what can happen with blended finance, what can happen when professional advisors are, like myself, are being more and more drawn to these conversations for a variety of reasons, because board members are asking them or individual clients are asking them to account for these things or to steer their portfolios. I would say as we, over the next decade, we need more advisors who are better educated to be able to deliver this kind of process to an institution or an individual. That's going to happen, and it's happening now, and more advisors are coming to this, fortunately. But I would ask you all to challenge, whether you sit on a board or for your own self, challenge your own advisors to be thoughtful about, do I have any ability to invest with environmental social governance factors in what I'm doing or in my institution that I'm representing? I will also tell you it's going to become a major fiduciary obligation. I will say that I don't know exactly when, but it's in my bet, it's inside of 10 years, probably inside of 5 years, where taking an environmental, social, and governance diligence perspective becomes a fiduciary requirement.
Because of this differential outcome that they're producing in general and addressing those intangibles.
It's addressing the intangibles. If you're the steward of an ERISA plan, an employee savings income retirement account, I believe I said that right, you are mandated by the Department of Labor now in the current iteration to assess ESG as part of your fiduciary responsibility if you're a trustee for an employee retirement plan. That's the current letter language by the Department of Labor that says that environmental, social, and governance factors are material, and they are indications of risk and return. And if you're a shepherd of long-term assets of employees in perpetuity, you need to consider the change that environmental, social, and governance factors bring. That's the start of the fiduciary movement that will, in my opinion, that's not my firm, we're not making a public statement saying this is happening, but inevitably in a few years, it's going to be a fiduciary consideration. The data's now there 10, 20 years later, and it's evolved for us as professional investment managers and advisors to incorporate ESG data as a fiduciary.
Okay. Sandy.
Hi, Sandy Magnan, co-chair of the Roundtable. Thank you so much for being here. I think you've partially answered a question I had about that in the next decade there would be more financial advisors who could advise in this kind of way. But if you had to fast forward to that 10-year mark or 5-year mark out, what would be measures of success that we knew that that investment was having the kind of impact on health, well-being, and equity? Are you at that point, or do you feel like that's some of your responsibility to figure out what would not only be measures of kind of the process, but some of the outcomes that could come from this kind of investing?
Thank you for your question. The outcomes reporting, especially on the private impact side, has become incredibly good, in my opinion, from where it was 5 years ago, and I think it's going to continue. That is the big, I think that's the big question and opportunity, is to improve on measurement and reporting of outcomes, which I believe is going to continue to tie more and more to the performance of an investment. I think we're going to get it. My view is that as outcomes and reporting in impact measurement improve and become more transparent and are reported at more of a company level, they will be much more factored into kind of the value that that company derives in the marketplace. If that explains it. We're in the decade, I think ESG we've sort of passed the peak of what the sort of the big bang of the revolution of ESG in portfolios, and we're in this peak of impact measurement being at the forefront and really being the next decade of opportunity. And then how can you use that measurement to de-risk investments or create more of a track record or more of an impact performance track record. But once you start to do some impact investing, some of the firms that offer great impact investments are doing an excellent job on the reporting side.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for your presentation and discussion. Mary Pittman, President of the Public Health Institute and a member of the Roundtable. I guess I'm pursuing a similar line of questioning about how do you measure impact and what sources of data are you accessing to even consider some of the investments that you want to make? I mean, I think we're in a data revolution period again. With new sources of data, new ways to analyze data, and a lot of tools that are being used at the state and local level to take a look across different sectors, which I think brings a different set of lenses. I'm just wondering, hospital community benefits is one way of seeing how hospitals are investing. Public health also is a treasure trove of data around health. And have you begun to tap into some of those databases and utilize them at the front end to see where are there great needs and where's the potential to invest?
Great question. I have, but only frankly through the partnership that I've got with Avivar currently. We as an institution, and I don't think any institution of our kind of size is doing that level of impact measurement today. And we are more thinking at the big picture of what are the larger corporations doing, and we're measuring very closely across those factors. But really the measurement you're talking about really is coming through specialist advisors that are setting up to measure that over a period of time and setting those objectives in the beginning. And I think in the case study I gave a little bit of example of with Avivar is that those outcome and the measurement kind of opportunity is in the forefront of the plan to deploy the assets. So we're beginning with the end in mind a little bit around what are the types of measurements and outcomes we would want, then what are the kinds of investments that would drive that kind of read or impact measurement. So it's almost a starting point. And I would even, if I'm allowed, turn it to Lisa for any, I don't know if you would add to that.
Said the words that we often say, which are working backwards. What is it that you want to accomplish? Is capital a part of the solution? If so, what kind of capital do you need? But then how are you going to measure that result? And I think the big challenge that we always talk about in place-based impact investing is the difference between outputs and outcomes and impact, which, Mary, I know you deal with all the time. But are we just measuring units of housing? That's not necessarily the indicator we want if those units of housing now are occupied by higher income residents because the original low income folks have been displaced. So we have to pull all of that together, and we are. And I think that's one of the reasons that partnership is an important theme to bring the complementary expertise to get that done, oftentimes initially at a community level, and then over time being able to scale it through larger investment initiatives.
It harkens back to the comments in our keynote start today about the imperative of these kinds of partnerships and collaboration to be able to bring the right pieces together to make this advancement.
Continue this dialogue. That was sort of where my question was going to go to. Bobby Milstein, a member of the Roundtable. It's fascinating to think about this as a decade where ESG principles will go from being principles to actually routine practices. And I'm wondering what the next generation of ESG advisors and those who are going to build this into institutional practice, where do they get their training? And is this an area where population health science and others who are thinking about health and well-being in its kind of broader sense ought to be working with folks to build out, first, a full understanding of what evidence we do possess already and what we don't. That could on its own lead to greater clarity about where the research agenda ought to be, to line it up with where the the investment agenda ought to be. And then the other piece of this puzzle is you have the investors and those that provide the screen and the structure around that. You also mentioned something about multi-generational wealth and how that perspective actually is driving this movement. But I'm wondering if you can speak to whether that multi-generational wealth orientation expands the time horizon for the investments themselves and what people would be looking for, and whether they too, those families that have a long-term outlook, ought to be part of the architecture of what an investment screening structure could look like as a routine, if that's not.
Maybe I'll take the second question first. I guess depending on the level of the family wealth, you could set up a platform for a very long period of time where you're doing seed angel investments in VCs that are meant to become family-owned businesses for a long time that align to what the family's thematics are. I guess your first question, really the advisor, so where are they accessing the training? There are groups like the United States Sustainable Investment Forum, US SIF, which is probably the biggest, most well-known kind of platform for training of advisors in the market. The CFA curriculum has added an ESG requirement to its completion now. I and other I've been part of training portfolio managers inside organizations I've been affiliated with, and there are dedicated portfolio management training for those PMs who are ESG inclined, but it's still sort of an opt-in. It's going to become the portfolio managers will not, in my opinion, are not going to have clients in 10 years if they don't adapt. It's kind of like if Boston doesn't build the waterfront park or the seawall, it's going to flood in some amount of time. Same thing, portfolio managers who don't adapt to the ESG movement are going to go, they're going to be out of the business, because it's the way of sustainability 15 years ago was very novel and very much something to market around, and ESG is going to be, the information it provides today is going to go away in 5 and 10 years. That said, advisors will get better and better at understanding how to allocate. I think the key is when advisors learn how traditional investing and ESG and impact investing are one and the same, then we will have really gotten somewhere. And we're still 5 or 10 years from that. And then we're in this opportunity then the opportunity with true advisory will be how can you maximize the impact to mission, or to how can you maximize to fiduciary, or whatever the key driving force is. But I really think the outcomes and the impacts are the next big chapter, and our platforms are going to just get better and better. We're a really strong platform for public market investing across the ESG sort of mission aligned or impact spectrum, but because private market investments tend to be low in terms of, tend to have very little track record, they're just not on mainstream platforms today, but they're going to be in 5 and 10 years. So the amount of private market access and the scale of private market access, instead of just only being the big opportunities and impact on private markets on developed platforms like a Bank of America type platform, that's going to increase dramatically. An imprint type acquisition for a Goldman makes total sense, and we need more and more organizations, and we as an organization are very actively working on building out impact diligence to be able to accommodate more products on our platform that represent impact. And then one final point is, the structures of these products, the way they're constructed, they may not look like things we've seen in the past. So our diligence platforms are going to have to evolve on the impact space too, to be able to understand the risk and return of the particular transaction, because it may not look just like something that people have done in the past.
Okay, we are up to time. Do you have a quick comment? It would have to be very short.
A very short question.
Yeah, and we'll keep a short answer.
Mark Garavich, NYU.
Come closer to the mic, please.
Question is, what is there a way to say in what proportion of investments are ESG at this point, and what might that grow to? I mean, I'm asking it in an inarticulate way, but maybe you know how to answer it.
Yeah, it's a broad question. So what proportion of investments are ESG at this point? For example, very hard to invest with an ESG lens in small cap stocks today. So large companies, very easy to invest in ESG with track records that you could compare against a non-ESG counterpart. Harder to do that, much harder to invest in small companies, public market, with an ESG lens. Other asset classes, private market, ESG, getting way easier to access as more and more developed private market funds are coming that have a dedicated ESG process. So improving, I would say.
All right. Thank you. And join me in thanking Jamie for joining us today.
Thank you.